Chapter 1. The metal of the carriage shrieked before tearing apart. Lysanthia didn't scream. She was thrown violently against the iron bars as the death transport flipped off the snowy path and crashed into the ravine. The impact rattled her bones, but she only gritted her teeth. She lay in the splintered remains of the cage, her breathing shallow. Footsteps vibrated through the frozen ground. Heavy, deliberate, the cursed wolf had come to claim his tribute. The thick steel door was ripped off its hinges with a sickening crunch. It crashed into the snow. A massive silhouette blocked the moonlight. Golden eyes burned through the shadows, radiating a suffocating, ancient danger. "You are not the one I was promised." His voice wasn't just sound. It was a physical weight that pressed painfully against her chest. Lysanthia forced herself to sit up, ignoring the sharp pain in her ribs. She looked straight into those glowing eyes. Agreements change. He moved faster than a blink. He didn't strike her. He simply stepped into her space, his massive frame pinning her against the frozen wreckage. The sheer dominance rolling off him paralyzed her muscles. His large, leather-clad hand gripped her jaw, tilting her head up with an iron, inescapable force. The scent of cedar, burning ash, and pure, terrifying alpha power suffocated her. "I do not take scraps," he growled. "Where is Elowen?" "Safe," Lysanthia answered, her voice strained but steady. She gripped his wrist. It felt like cold stone. "With the man who threw me away." His golden eyes narrowed. He stepped fully into the moonlight. Razian, the monster of the abyss. Half man, half beast. Entirely a nightmare. Black scales shimmered faintly along his jawline, a terrifying marker of the dragon wolf bloodline. He leaned in, inhaling sharply against her hair. His nose wrinkled in disgust. "You smell like another alpha's discarded claim," he sneered, his voice a low, vibrating threat. "A broken bond. Then finish breaking me." She refused to look away. "I drugged my sister. I took the death carriage. I am your tribute now. Do it. You think you can command me?" His grip on her jaw tightened slightly. Not enough to crush, but enough to demand absolute submission. "I think you're wasting time." A low rumble rattled deep in his broad chest. "You have no idea what you've offered yourself to, little girl. I know you're a monster," she whispered harshly. "And I have absolutely nothing left to lose. So kill me or walk away." His thumb brushed down her neck, stopping abruptly. His eyes locked onto the jagged, ugly scar resting on her collarbone. The first bite. The mark Cyrus had left before abandoning her for her sister. "Who marked you and left you to die?" Razian demanded. The anger in his voice wasn't for her. It was a primal, territorial rage at the scent of a coward on her skin. "None of your business. You are in my territory. Everything here is my business." He shifted his hand, intending to inspect the scar. As his thumb brushed against her cheek, it swiped over a fresh, deep cut she had gotten from the carriage crash. Warm blood smeared across his cold skin. Then, the world stopped. The moment her blood touched him, a violent shockwave rippled through the frozen air. The heavy, suffocating scent of his terrifying dominance shattered. It was instantly replaced by something entirely different. Something intoxicating. Wild mint and dark chocolate. Mate. The realization hit the air like a physical blow. But it wasn't just the mate bond. Something older, something deeply buried within Lysanthia's veins, violently reacted. The blood of a spirit walker. Razian's pupils dilated until his eyes were entirely pitch black. The terrifying aura around him collapsed. He gasped. A raw, ragged, desperate sound. He stumbled backward, ripping his hand away from her face as if he had been burned by holy fire. Lysanthia braced herself against the broken steel. She waited for the fatal strike. She waited for him to tear her apart, in a blind frenzy. Nothing happened. She looked up, squinting through the harsh wind. The apex predator, the nightmare of the realms, wasn't attacking. His massive frame shook uncontrollably. He crashed to his knees in the snow, his head bowed, both of his hands clamped fiercely over his ears. His broad chest heaved as he dragged in frantic, trembling breaths. "The screaming," he whispered, his voice cracking with a vulnerability that shouldn't belong to a monster. Lysanthia froze. "What?" He looked up at her. The golden fire in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by absolute, paralyzing shock. He stared at his own hand, the hand that bore a single, glowing smear of her blood. For a century, 1,000 ancient beasts had torn at his mind, screaming in eternal agony. It was the curse that made him a monster, the madness that isolated him from the world. Now, for the first time in 100 years, there was only silence. He crawled one step toward her. Not as a predator stalking prey, but as a broken man. He stopped inches from her boots. He didn't touch her. He didn't dare taint her. He looked up into her eyes, his voice barely a raw, desperate rasp. "Why does your blood silence my hell?" Chapter 2. The heavy iron door of the ice vault slammed shut. Razian backed into the shadows. The moment she was no longer near him, the deafening roar of 1,000 ancient beasts returned. The curse demanded blood. Before the madness could fully claim him, the door pushed open. Lysanthia stepped inside, wearing a heavy, oversized fur cloak. She closed the door behind her. "Get out," Razian warned, his voice a distorted, monstrous growl. "I see prey, not a woman." "Leave." She didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward him. Her boots crunched rapidly on the ice. "Stop." He held up a trembling hand, his golden eyes flashing dangerously. "My life stopped being mine the moment Cyrus threw me away," she said, stopping right in front of his towering frame. "I have nothing to lose." Lysanthia reached out. She pressed both bare palms flat against his freezing jaw. The visual signature moment. The reaction was instantaneous. The moment her skin connected with his, the thick black frost covering the entire vault violently shattered. Millions of ice crystals exploded outward, raining down around them like glowing silver glass. The golden fire in his eyes dissolved. The crushing chaos in his skull evaporated into absolute, shocking silence. But for Lysanthia, the world tilted. The 1,000 voices didn't disappear. They shifted. The catastrophic weight of the ancient curse crashed into her mind. Her breath vanished instantly. Her body simply shut down under the immense, invisible pressure, and her legs gave out. "Lysanthia!" Razian caught her midair. He gripped her waist, sheer panic ripping through him as her head fell back against his arm. "No, no!" He dragged her against his chest, shaking her slightly. "Wake up!" A terrifying second passed. Then, she gasped. It was a sharp, desperate intake of air. Her eyes snapped open, dilated and terrified. As the invisible weight of the beasts roared in her mind, tears spilled rapidly over her cheeks, but her hands blindly found his shoulders and gripped tight. "Let go!" he ordered, realizing with absolute horror what she was doing. She was carrying his hell. "It will break you. I can hold it." She choked out. Her voice was trembling violently, but she refused to let go. "Just let yourself breathe." Razian stared at this frail, discarded human. Her body had literally shut down to give him 1 second of peace. The apex predator folded. Razian collapsed to his knees on the ice, pulling her down with him. He wrapped his massive arms around her, burying his face securely into the heavy fur of her shoulder. He clung to her like a drowning man. His broad back shook. "Stop," he whispered against her cloak, his voice completely broken. "Please, I am not worth this." "You are," she whispered back. She stroked his dark hair, enduring the agonizing screams in her own head. "You are." The morning sun broke through the heavy stained glass. Lysanthia woke up with a sharp intake of breath. She was in a massive, silk-sheeted bed. The fire was roaring. Razian was gone, but the faint scent of cedar lingered on the pillows. The mental connection had broken when she passed out from exhaustion. She sat up. A strange, burning sensation prickled at her collarbone. She walked over to the tall silver mirror in the corner of the room. She froze. Her trembling fingers brushed her neck. The old, jagged scar, the first bite that Cyrus had left her years ago, was no longer a faded white line. It was glowing. A sickening, unnatural crimson red pulsed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat, and from the center of the old wound, a single drop of pitch-black liquid oozed out. It wasn't a rejected mate mark. It was a parasite. Chapter 3. The war horns shattered the morning silence. Lysanthia stood on the high stone balcony of the abyssal keep. Below, the frozen courtyard was completely flooded with golden armor. The Dawn army had arrived. At their center sat Cyrus. He rode a white stallion, wearing the pristine silver crown of the Dawn pack. He looked exactly as she remembered, flawlessly handsome, undeniably arrogant, and entirely hollow. Lysanthia. Cyrus's voice echoed off the icy walls, amplified by his alpha command. Come down. She gripped the freezing stone railing. The wind whipped her hair, but she didn't shiver. I am the tribute, Cyrus. I am exactly where you sent the carriage. Cyrus laughed. It was a cold, mocking sound designed to carry to every soldier in the courtyard. You stole your sister's carriage. You drugged your own Luna, Cyrus called out, loud enough for both armies to hear. He was putting on a show. Did you really think the Abyss would want you? You are a discarded shadow, Lysanthia. A mistake I took pity on before I chose a real queen. Whispers rippled through the golden ranks. A few soldiers smirked. Cyrus drove the knife deeper, publicly weaponizing their history. You couldn't handle the rejection. I gave you the first bite out of charity. You were a warm bed for a night, nothing more. Don't embarrass yourself by pretending to be a martyr. Every word was calculated to humiliate her, to strip her of her dignity and isolate her in front of the world. She didn't lower her head. Her jaw tightened, her nails biting into her palms. If I am nothing, then take your army and leave. I came for the beast, Cyrus sneered, drawing his gleaming silver sword. And to take back the broken spare he stole. The temperature instantly plummeted. The torches along the fortress walls snuffed out in perfect unison. The air grew so intensely heavy that the Dawn army's warhorses began to panic, bucking and violently thrashing against their reins. A towering shadow stepped onto the balcony beside Lysanthia. Razian didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The sheer, crushing pressure of his presence forced the entire front line of the Dawn army to their knees. The arrogant smirk on Cyrus's face vanished, replaced by an involuntary, trembling flinch. Razian's golden eyes were locked onto Cyrus. It wasn't anger. It was pure, predatory death. You dare come to my gates. Razian's voice was a low, vibrating rumble that physically shook the stone beneath their feet. And insult what is mine? Cyrus swallowed hard, forcing his chin up. She doesn't belong to you, beast. She's my reject. She still carries my scent in that ugly scar on her neck. Razian didn't roar. He didn't summon fire. He turned away from the army, focusing entirely on Lysanthia. His massive, calloused hand gently cupped her jaw. With his other hand, he hooked a finger under the collar of her cloak and pulled it aside, completely exposing the jagged, pulsing red scar on her collarbone for the entire army to witness. Your scent is a disease, Razian said softly, but the sound cracked through the valley like thunder. He leaned down, right in front of Cyrus. Right in front of 1,000 fully armed soldiers. Razian pressed his mouth firmly against the old, ruined scar. He didn't bite, but the raw dominance behind the action was absolute. A shockwave of dark, ancient magic pulsed from his touch, violently burning away every lingering trace of Cyrus's history from her skin. The scent of wild mint, dark chocolate, and overwhelming, territorial alpha power exploded into the freezing air. He pulled back, his eyes flashing with a terrifying, protective darkness. He looked down at the trembling Dawn King. From this second until the end of time, Razian roared, his voice splitting the gray sky. She carries the scent of the dragon. Cyrus's face twisted in pure, humiliated rage. His authority had just been publicly shattered. "Kill him!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Fire!" Dozens of silver spears launched into the air, whistling straight for the balcony. Lysanthia gasped, instinctively raising her arms to shield herself. Razian didn't move away. He simply pulled her flush against his broad chest, shielding her entirely with his own body. The visual signature moment. The silver spears struck his back. They didn't pierce his flesh. The exact moment the deadly metal made contact, pitch black, jagged dragon scales violently rippled across Razian's skin like armor made of living obsidian. The enchanted silver spears instantly shattered into harmless dust upon impact. The entire Dawn army froze in absolute paralyzing terror. Weapons slipped from their hands, clattering against the icy ground. The monster wasn't just a wolf. He was something far older, and they had just provoked him. Chapter 4. The Dawn army broke. Panic ripped through the golden ranks. Horses reared, throwing their riders into the snow. The sight of the black dragon's scales, the ultimate, terrifying proof of a forbidden bloodline, shattered whatever courage Cyrus had commanded. "Retreat!" Cyrus screamed. His voice was shrill, completely stripped of its former arrogance. He violently pulled his white stallion around. "Fall back!" They fled. The glorious Dawn pack scrambled over each other like frightened prey, leaving their shattered silver weapons in the dirt. On the balcony, Razian didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. He stood like a dark monolith against the freezing wind, watching the cowards run. His arm was still wrapped tightly around Lysanthia, his chest rising and falling with heavy, controlled breaths. Slowly, the black scales faded from his skin, receding back beneath his flesh. He immediately stepped away from her. The sudden warmth of his body vanished. The distance felt colder than the winter wind. "Go inside," Razian ordered. He didn't look at her. His voice was tight, strained with an iron restraint. "Lock the door." Night fell over the abyssal keep. The massive bedchamber was silent, lit only by the dying embers in the hearth. Lysanthia sat in the center of the massive silk bed. She wasn't alone, but she felt entirely isolated. Razian was across the room. He wasn't in a chair. He was sitting on the freezing, jagged stone floor in the darkest corner, his back pressed hard against the icy wall. His knees were drawn up, his arms resting heavily on them. He was staring at the ground, deliberately keeping his eyes away from her. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "You are the lord of this fortress," Lysanthia said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "You don't have to sleep on the floor." "I do." His reply was instant. It was a harsh, gravelly rumble. "There is enough room. Room is not the problem." His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck strained visibly in the dim light. "I claimed you today, Lysanthia. I put my scent on you. In front of my enemies. You protected me. I marked you as mine." He finally looked up. His eyes flashed a dangerous, vivid gold in the dark. "Do you understand what that does to a dragon wolf? My beast is awake. It is clawing at my ribs, demanding I cross this room and finish the claim. If I get into that bed, I will not be able to stop." He wasn't trying to scare her. He was warning her of his own failing limits. "I am a monster holding on to a single thread of sanity." Razian ground out, his hands curling into tight fists. He stared at her, the raw desperation completely shattering his terrifying facade. "If I lose my control, I lose you. And you are the only reason I am still holding the line." Lysanthia looked at him. She saw the agonizing effort it took for him to stay in that corner. He was punishing himself, isolating himself in the freezing cold, just to ensure she remained safe from his own instincts. Cyrus had slept in her bed and made her feel worthless. This terrifying, cursed beast was sleeping on the ice to protect her dignity. Lysanthia pushed the heavy silk blankets aside. She placed her bare feet on the freezing stone floor. "What are you doing?" Razian's voice dropped an octave, laced with absolute panic. "Get back." She didn't listen. She walked across the dark room. Lysanthia, stop. He pushed himself up slightly, pressing his back harder against the wall as if trying to merge with the stone. I said stay away. She reached his corner. The cold radiating from the floor here was brutal. She didn't hesitate. She sank down onto the freezing stone right next to him. You are not the only one who gets to decide things, she said simply. Razian completely froze. He held his breath, his massive frame going entirely rigid. She didn't try to kiss him. She didn't push him. She simply leaned sideways, resting her head gently against his broad, tense shoulder. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small, but keeping her body pressed firmly against his side. I am not afraid of you, she whispered into the dark. You didn't break me today. You gave me my pride back. So if you sit in the cold, I sit in the cold. Razian squeezed his eyes shut. A tortured, shuddering breath escaped his lips, slowly, agonizingly. His rigid posture broke. He didn't push her away. Instead, he unclasped his heavy fur mantle and threw it over both of them, shielding her from the biting cold of the floor. He rested his chin lightly on the top of her head. For the first time in a century, the monster of the abyss wasn't alone in the dark. The fire burned down to gray ash. The room plunged into absolute pitch blackness. Razian was deeply asleep, his breathing slow and even. The mental silence Lysanthia provided had pulled him into a heavy, exhaustion-induced rest. But Lysanthia was dreaming of fire. Underneath the heavy mantle, the temperature around her began to violently rise. Her eyes snapped open. She gasped, but no sound came out. She was completely paralyzed. The visual signature moment. A blinding, sickening red light flooded the corner of the room. The jagged scar on her collarbone pulsed with a violent, unnatural energy. The skin didn't tear, but a thick, pitch-black liquid seeped from the center of the old wound, dropping onto the freezing stone. The exact moment the dark magic touched the floor, it ignited into crackling black flames. The flames rapidly traced violent, chaotic geometric patterns across the ice. It was drawing a massive, ancient rune circle directly underneath her body. A teleportation matrix. Lysanthia tried to scream his name. She tried to grab Razian's arm. Her fingers wouldn't move. The parasite spell had completely hijacked her nervous system. The black rune circle flared with a blinding flash of crimson light. A vacuum of air exploded in the room. The deafening crack jolted Razian awake. His eyes snapped open, blazing gold. His hand instinctively reached out to grab her. His fingers closed around empty air. The red light was gone. The mantle collapsed onto the freezing stone. Lysanthia was gone. Razian stared at the scorch mark on the floor, the metallic scent of dark magic burning his lungs. A single second passed in absolute silence. Then, a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth shattered the night. Chapter 5. The freezing stone floor vanished. Lysanthia hit the ground hard. But it wasn't ice beneath her hands. It was polished, warm white marble. The heavy, dark scent of the abyss was instantly replaced by the overwhelming, sickeningly sweet smell of jasmine and burning incense. Slowly, she pushed herself up. The massive stained glass windows of the room cast golden light across the pristine floor. She knew this room. The grand hall of the Dawn Pack. Slow, deliberate clapping echoed through the vast, empty hall. Lysanthia snapped her head up. Cyrus sat casually on the golden throne. He wasn't wearing his battle armor anymore. He wore pristine white silk, looking every bit the untouchable king. He smiled. It was a cold, perfectly calculated expression. "Welcome home, little bird," Cyrus said. Lysanthia tried to stand, but an invisible weight slammed down on her shoulders, forcing her to her knees. Magic. The red glow from her collarbone was pulsing in time with the crystal staff leaning against Cyrus's throne. "What did you do?" she demanded, glaring up at him. Cyrus stood. He walked slowly down the marble steps. You always were so wonderfully dramatic. Lysanthia. Drugging your sister. Stealing the death carriage. Offering yourself to the monster. You truly believed you were writing your own tragic revenge story. He stopped in front of her, looking down with absolute pity. Did you honestly think you tricked me? Cyrus laughed softly. I let you take that carriage. Lysanthia's breath hitched. No. Yes, he whispered, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. I needed you to hate me. I needed you to feel so utterly broken and discarded that you would willingly walk straight into the beast's jaws. He knelt, forcing her to look at him. You see, Razian is an anomaly. The dragon wolf has too much power. It's unnatural. The council wants him dead, but his fortress is impenetrable, and his magic is too old to break. Lysanthia's heart began to hammer against her ribs. The realization was a slow, creeping horror. Cyrus pointed a finger at her collarbone. So, I gave them a key. The first bite, Lysanthia whispered, her voice trembling. It was never a mark of affection, Cyrus sneered. It was a parasite. A seed of dark magic designed by the elder witches. But a parasite needs a host. And it needs bait. I couldn't just send an assassin. The beast would smell a trap. I had to send something completely innocent. Something broken. He grabbed her chin, his grip bruising. I broke you, Lysanthia. I shattered your heart so perfectly that you smelled like a desperate, dying thing. I knew his alpha instincts wouldn't let him kill you. I knew he would try to fix you. You used me, she breathed out, absolute disgust coating every word. I made you a weapon, Cyrus corrected, his voice echoing in the grand hall. He stood up, throwing his arms wide. And it worked perfectly. He claimed you today. He put his scent on you. The parasite woke up the moment his magic touched it. Lysanthia remembered the teleportation circle. The black blood. The way Razian had warned her that his control was slipping. What happens now? She asked. She refused to cry. She refused to give him that satisfaction. Cyrus smiled. It was a terrifying, victorious grin. Now, the Trojan horse is inside the gates, Cyrus explained slowly, savoring every word. Right now, the beast is tearing the world apart looking for his lost mate. He will come here, and when he does, I will force him to make a choice. He leaned in close. In order to save your miserable life, he will have to complete the bond. He will have to sink his teeth into your neck and give you the true mark. And the exact second his fangs pierce that parasite, Cyrus's eyes widened with manic greed. It will activate. It will siphon every drop of his ancient, infinite dragon wolf power straight into my veins. Lysanthia stopped breathing. She wasn't a hostage. She was a bomb. She was a living, breathing trap designed to execute the only man who had ever treated her with dignity. I am going to drain him dry, Cyrus whispered. And you are the one holding the needle. He will kill you first, Lysanthia snarled, jerking her chin out of his grip. He will burn this entire palace to ash. Let him try. Cyrus turned his back to her, walking confidently up the steps to his throne. He is blinded by instinct. He is an animal, and animals always walk into the trap when you use the right bait. Silence stretched across the grand hall. The golden light felt sickening. Then, the floor trembled. It was faint at first. A tiny vibration in the white marble. Then, the massive crystal chandelier above them rattled violently. Cyrus stopped on the steps. His confident smile faltered. The visual signature moment. The grand double doors of the Dawnpack Hall were built from enchanted oak, completely impenetrable. Suddenly, they began to warp. The golden light filtering through the windows vanished, instantly swallowed by pitch-black shadows. The temperature in the room plummeted from comfortable warmth to absolute, freezing zero in a single second. Frost violently spiderwebbed across the white marble. Cyrus grabbed his staff, his knuckles turning white. The oak doors didn't just break. They exploded, a catastrophic shockwave of pure, Black fire shattered the doors into a million flaming splinters. The blast ripped through the hall, tearing the golden banners from the walls and shattering the stained glass windows. Through the roaring black flames and the smoke, a towering silhouette stepped into the hall. His eyes were burning with a vivid, terrifying gold. The dark magic practically rolled off his shoulders like a storm. The dragon wolf had come to collect. Chapter 6. The black smoke cleared, swirling around Razian's boots. Dozens of elite Dawn Pack guards rushed forward, drawing their silver swords. They didn't even make it within striking distance. Razian didn't raise his hands. He simply let his alpha aura crash into the room. The physical weight of his dominance slammed into the guards like a tidal wave. Men in heavy armor dropped instantly, their knees shattering the marble floor. They gasped for air, completely paralyzed by the terrifying, ancient pressure rolling off the dragon wolf. Razian stepped over them. His golden eyes were locked entirely on the throne. "Let her go," Razian commanded. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, lethal promise that vibrated through the very foundations of the palace. Cyrus didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still on the dais, holding his crystal staff. A wicked, arrogant smile stretched across his face. "You broke my doors, beast," Cyrus mocked, his voice echoing in the ruined hall. "But you are still too late." Cyrus slammed the base of his crystal staff into the marble floor. The visual signature moment. A blinding crimson shockwave exploded from the staff. It instantly connected with the jagged red scar on Lysanthia's collarbone. Lysanthia collapsed. The dark magic coiled tightly around her chest, locking her breath in place. Her body refused to respond, caught in an invisible force she couldn't fight. She dropped to the polished floor, her vision flashing white. "Lysanthia!" Razian roared, lunging forward. Ah! Cyrus raised his hand. The crystal staff flared brighter. Razian froze instantly. He stopped dead in his tracks, his massive hands curling into fists so tight his joints popped. "Take another step," Cyrus said coldly, "and she doesn't survive this." Razian's chest heaved. The dark fire flickering around his shoulders threatened to burn the world down, but he couldn't move. For a man who possessed infinite power, he was entirely trapped. "You coward!" Razian ground out, his fangs bared. "Fight me. Let her go and face me." "I am facing you," Cyrus laughed coldly. "I am just fighting smarter. She is a parasite, Razian. A magical siphon." Cyrus walked slowly down the steps, circling Lysanthia's trembling form. "The spell is overwhelming her," Cyrus said, almost casually. "Her body won't hold much longer. There is only one way to save her." "You know what it is?" Razian stared at Lysanthia. She was gasping, her face pale, her eyes locked onto his. "Don't," her eyes begged him. "Don't do it. Complete the bond," Cyrus demanded, dropping the act. His voice turned greedy and manic. "Give her the true mark. Sink your teeth into that scar and claim her. Your ancient magic will override the burning. It will save her life." Cyrus leaned forward, pointing the staff directly at Razian. "But the exact second your teeth pierce that spell, the siphon opens. I will drain every ounce of your dragon wolf power straight into my veins. You will become nothing, and I will become a god. The ultimate trap. If Razian did nothing, Lysanthia wouldn't survive the spell. If he marked her, he surrendered his absolute power to a tyrant, dooming the entire realm and stripping himself of the only thing that kept him alive. "Mark her!" Cyrus yelled, slamming his staff down again. Razian squeezed his eyes shut. His whole body shook with pure, unadulterated rage. He looked at the Dawn King, then down at the discarded woman who had sat with him in the freezing dark. The choice was impossible, but Razian didn't care about the realm. He stepped forward. His golden eyes flared with total, tragic submission. He was going to give up his infinite power. He was going to let himself be drained dry, just to stop her pain. Lysanthia saw it. She saw the absolute surrender in the monster's eyes. No. She refused to be the weapon that destroyed him. Cyrus had used her, manipulated her, and humiliated her. She would not let him win using her body. Lysanthia forced herself up, fighting against the crushing weight of the spell. "I am not your weapon," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. A few feet away, a guard struggled under Razian's aura, his sword barely steady in his grip. She didn't hesitate. She moved, not away from the danger, but straight through it. "Lysanthia!" Razine's voice broke. She didn't stop. Chapter 7. The silver blade did not pierce her. A massive hand clamped around the sharp metal, stopping it mere inches from her chest. Razian didn't even flinch. He gripped the heavy broadsword with his bare hand. The enchanted silver hissed wildly against his skin, burning him, but he held it with an iron, unbreakable grip. A single drop of crimson slid down the edge of the blade, falling onto the white marble. The Dawn Guard holding the sword gasped in pure terror. He let go of the hilt and scrambled backward, crawling away from the apex predator. Razian tossed the heavy sword aside. It clattered harmlessly across the shattered floor. Then, he dropped to his knees and pulled Lysanthia hard against his broad chest. "No," Lysanthia choked out. Her voice was a desperate, breathless rasp. She pushed weakly against his dark armor. "Why did you stop me? Let me break the spell." "You do not get to die for me," Razian growled. His voice trembled with a raw, protective fury that shook the air around them. "I did not let you fall in the snow, Lysanthia. I will not let you fall here." "He will drain you," she cried, tears of frustration spilling over her cheeks as the dark magic pulsed tighter around her lungs. "He will take everything. You have to let me go." "Let him try," Razian whispered fiercely. He pressed his forehead against hers, grounding her in the storm. "I survived a century of madness. I can survive a coward." Slow, mocking applause echoed down from the throne. "How incredibly poetic," Cyrus sneered. He leaned heavily on his glowing crystal staff, his pristine white clothes a sharp contrast to the destruction of the hall. "The monster has a heart, but unfortunately for you, a heart doesn't stop a magical siphon. Look at her, Razian. She is fading." It was true. The crimson glow from the jagged scar on her collarbone flared violently. Lysanthia gasped, her body arching in his arms as the pressure became unbearable. The parasite was demanding the bond, aggressively punishing her for the delay. "Stop fighting it," Cyrus ordered, his eyes wide with manic anticipation. "She has seconds left. Mark her. Give me my crown." "You really thought you mattered to anyone, Lysanthia?" Cyrus continued, twisting the psychological knife. "You were a pawn. A broken little bird I used to catch a god. And now you get to watch him fall. And it is entirely your fault." Lysanthia's breath hitched. The words hit her harder than the magic. Before Cyrus could speak another word, a suffocating wave of pure, pitch-black dominance exploded from Razian. The physical weight of his alpha aura slammed into the dais. The marble steps violently cracked. Cyrus stumbled backward, his arrogant smirk instantly vanishing as the sheer terror of the dragon wolf crushed the air out of his lungs. "You talk too much, coward," Razian stated. He didn't shout. The lethal calmness in his voice was far more terrifying than a roar. Razian didn't even look at the Dawn King. He kept his golden eyes entirely fixed on Lysanthia. A true alpha does not need a trick to bring down his enemy. Razian continued, his voice resonating through the ruined hall. "You rely on stolen magic, Cyrus, because you have absolutely nothing of your own." "Mark her!" Cyrus screamed, his voice cracking under the terrifying pressure of Razian's aura. "Do it now, or she dies." Razian looked down at the woman in his arms. She was the outcast, the reject, the one the world threw away. And yet, she was the only one who had ever fought for him. She had sat with him in the freezing dark. She had taken his hell into her own mind just to give him a single moment of peace. "Lysanthia," Razian said softly, completely ignoring the desperate Dawn King. She forced her eyes open. Her vision was blurring, but she could see the golden fire burning brightly in his gaze. It wasn't the chaotic, wild fire of the curse. It was ancient, steady, and entirely devoted to her. "I am not going to surrender to him," Razian promised, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that warmed her freezing skin. "But I am going to claim you. Razian, no," she sobbed, her fingers weakly clutching his dark shirt. "He thinks he built a perfect trap," Razian interrupted smoothly. "He thinks my power is a river he can just drink from." Razian's massive hand gently cupped her cheek. His thumb carefully brushed away her tears, completely unaffected by the chaotic magic swirling around them. "He forgot what I am," Razian whispered, his golden eyes narrowing with a dangerous, ancient promise. "I am a dragon wolf. My power is not water, it is a storm." Cyrus slammed his staff down against the marble. "Do it! Now!" Razian shifted his focus back to Cyrus for a fraction of a second. His gaze held absolute, lethal intent. "You want my power, little king?" Razian's voice boomed through the shattered hall, carrying the weight of 1,000 ancient souls. "Then brace yourself." Razian shifted his attention back to Lysanthia. He gently tilted her head back, fully exposing the violently glowing red scar on her neck. He leaned in close. The heavy scent of wild mint and dark chocolate completely overpowered the sickly smell of Cyrus's dark magic. "If he wants to swallow the power of the dragon," Razian murmured against her skin, his breath sending a powerful shiver through her entire body. "I will let him taste the fire." Razian opened his mouth, his fangs extended, sharp and brilliantly white. He didn't hesitate. He sank his teeth directly into the center of the parasitic scar. The true mark. The exact second his fangs broke the skin, the world exploded into blinding light. Chapter 8. The world exploded into blinding light. The crimson energy tore from the parasite on Lysanthia's neck, ripping across the grand hall like a physical tether. It slammed directly into the glowing crystal of Cyrus's staff. Cyrus threw his head back and laughed. The sound was manic, echoing over the destruction of his palace. "Yes!" Cyrus screamed over the roaring magical wind. "I can feel it. The power of the abyss. It's mine." A blinding, golden aura erupted around the Dawn King. The sheer force of the stolen magic lifted his boots off the marble floor. He looked untouchable. He looked like a god. In Razian's arms, Lysanthia gasped. The crushing weight on her chest vanished instantly. The parasite wasn't suffocating her anymore. It was serving its true purpose as an open floodgate. She looked up at Razian in absolute horror. He was perfectly still. His fangs were still sunken into her skin. Holding the true mark. "Razian, pull away," she begged, feeling the immense, ancient power rushing out of him. He didn't pull away. Razian slowly opened his eyes. The warm, protective gold was gone. They were entirely, terrifyingly black. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't weakening. He was waiting. Across the room, Cyrus's laughter abruptly stopped. The triumphant smile on the Dawn King's face froze. The golden aura surrounding his body flickered violently. What is this?" Cyrus gasped, his voice suddenly tight with panic. He stared at his trembling hands. The crimson tether connecting them didn't break, but the color changed. A terrifying, pitch-black darkness began to bleed into the energy stream. It started at Razian's jaw and shot across the hall with the speed of lightning. "I told you," Razian's voice echoed in the room. He didn't speak the words aloud. The sound resonated directly within the ancient magic, shaking the very walls of the palace. "My power is a storm." The black energy slammed into the crystal staff. The visual signature moment. It wasn't raw magical power. It was the dragon's soul fire. A century of absolute, concentrated madness, rage, and agonizing ancient screams that Razian had held back in the dark. Cyrus didn't just absorb the power, he absorbed the curse. "No!" Cyrus shrieked. The invisible, crushing weight of 1,000 screaming beasts slammed into Cyrus's mind. The Dawn King's eyes rolled completely back. He dropped to his knees, hitting the cracked marble with a sickening thud. He tried to let go of the staff, but his fingers were locked tight. The black fire surged into his veins. It didn't burn his flesh. It targeted his magic. It incinerated the very core of his alpha authority. The enchanted crystal staff shattered into 1,000,000 useless pieces. Cyrus screamed a raw, pathetic, agonizing sound that stripped away every ounce of his dignity. He clawed desperately at his own chest, tearing his pristine white silk shirt, completely overwhelmed by the crushing mental pressure. "Make it stop!" Cyrus begged, writhing on the floor in front of his ruined throne. The golden aura around him shattered like cheap glass, fading into absolute nothingness. "Please, take it back!" Razian finally pulled back from Lysanthia's neck. He swiped the back of his hand across his mouth. The parasitic scar was completely gone. In its place rested a perfectly healed, glowing silver crescent moon, the true mark of the dragon wolf. Lysanthia took a deep, shuddering breath. Her lungs filled with clean air. The pain was entirely erased. Razian stood up slowly. He didn't look weakened in the slightest. If anything, the terrifying, suffocating dominance rolling off him was even stronger. The storm had been unleashed, and he was the absolute master of it. He looked down at Cyrus. The surviving Dawn Pack guards, who had been pinned to the floor by Razian's aura, watched in stunned silence. Their invincible king was curled in a pathetic ball on the floor. He was gasping, shivering violently, completely stripped of his magic, his alpha status, and his pride. He was nothing more than a broken, powerless human. The public humiliation was absolute. "You wanted the abyss," Razian said coldly, looking down at the ruined king. "Keep it." Razian turned his back on Cyrus, entirely dismissing him as a threat. He knelt back down on the shattered marble and gently scooped Lysanthia into his arms, lifting her effortlessly against his chest. She looked at the man who had abandoned her, now whimpering on the floor, permanently destroyed by his own greed. Then she looked up at the terrifying monster who had risked absolutely everything to save her. The trap was broken. The Dawn King was a memory, and the monster belonged to her. Chapter 9. The Grand Hall of the Dawn Pack was completely unrecognizable. Thick white dust drifted through the air, settling over shattered marble and broken glass. The sickeningly sweet smell of jasmine incense had been entirely burned away, replaced by the heavy, clean scent of the winter storm. Razian stood in the center of the ruins, holding Lysanthia securely against his chest. He didn't move. He simply stood there, his chest rising and falling in slow, deep breaths. His golden eyes were wide, staring blankly ahead. Lysanthia's heart skipped a beat. She reached up, her trembling fingers gently touching his jaw. "Razian? The magic. Did it hurt you?" He slowly blinked. He looked down at her, and for the first time since she had met him, there was no tension in his face. The deep, agonizing exhaustion that always shadowed his eyes was completely gone. "The voices," Razian whispered. His voice broke, thick with an emotion that the monster of the abyss was never supposed to feel. "Are they loud?" she asked softly, terrified that the true mark hadn't been enough to shield him. "They are gone." He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. A shuddering breath escaped his lips. "Not quieted," he murmured, his massive hands holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Gone. The curse went with the power he stole. My mind, it is completely silent." Lysanthia let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She buried her face into his dark shirt, her hands gripping his armor. He was free. A century of absolute, isolating madness had been completely burned away, leaving only the man beneath the monster. A pathetic, scraping sound interrupted the silence. A few yards away, Cyrus was crawling through the dust. His pristine white clothes were stained with ash. He was shivering violently, gasping for air. The terrifying mental weight of the dragon's curse had shattered his mind, stripping him of his alpha dominance and leaving him entirely empty. Cyrus dragged himself toward Razian's boots, the elite guards of the Dawn Pack, the ones who had sworn to protect their king with their lives, didn't move an inch. They remained pinned to the floor, heads bowed in absolute terror. No one was going to help him. "Kill me," Cyrus rasped. He didn't look up. He stared at the shattered marble, his voice a broken, hollow wheeze. "Finish it, beast! Rip my throat out!" He wanted a quick end. He wanted the death of a king who fell in battle. Razian looked down at the pathetic creature at his feet. His golden eyes flared, but it wasn't with rage. It was absolute, crushing apathy. "I do not take orders from dead men," Razian stated coldly. He didn't look at Cyrus anymore. He looked at Lysanthia. He gently set her down on her feet, his hand resting securely on her lower back. He was giving her the floor. This wasn't his revenge to take. Lysanthia stood straight. She didn't tremble. The true mark on her neck, the glowing silver crescent, pulsed with ancient, protective warmth. She wasn't the discarded spare anymore. She was the mate of the dragon wolf. She looked down at the man who had ruined her life. "You planned this all perfectly, Cyrus," Lysanthia said. Her voice rang clear and steady across the ruined hall. "You wanted the world to see me as a tragic sacrifice. You wanted them to remember you as a god." Cyrus squeezed his eyes shut, trembling as her words hit him. "But death is for warriors," Lysanthia continued, her tone dropping to a lethal calm. "And you have never fought a real battle in your life. You only ever fought from the shadows, using women as your shields." She stepped closer. Cyrus instinctively flinched away. "You don't get the mercy of a quick death." Lysanthia delivered her final judgment. "You are going to live, Cyrus. You are going to live without your magic, without your title, and without your pack. You are going to walk out of these gates as a nameless exile, and every time you look in a mirror, you will remember that the woman you threw away is the one who broke your crown." Cyrus let out a devastating, hopeless sob. He collapsed entirely against the floor, weeping openly in front of his surviving guards. The humiliation was absolute. He was a king reduced to a beggar, and he had to live with it forever. Lysanthia turned her back on him. Razian didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply offered his hand. Lysanthia took it. His fingers intertwined with hers. A perfect, unbreakable lock. They walked toward the destroyed double doors. As they stepped over the threshold, the golden light of the afternoon sun hit them. The massive courtyard of the Dawn Pack was dead silent. Thousands of soldiers stood outside, having witnessed the black fire tear through their palace. The moment Razian stepped into the light, with the glowing silver mark visible on Lysanthia's neck, the entire Dawn army moved as one. Weapons clattered to the ground. They didn't charge. They didn't shout. Row by row, thousand by thousand, the Dawn army dropped to their knees. They bowed their heads, offering absolute, terrified submission to the apex predators walking through their ranks. Razian didn't even acknowledge them. He guided Lysanthia through the parted sea of kneeling soldiers, leading her away from the ruins of her past. They reached the edge of the fortress gates, where the snowy forest met the stone path. The winter sun was blindingly bright. For the first time in his long, cursed life, Razian didn't flinch away from the light. He didn't have to hide in the dark anymore. He stopped walking. He turned to face Lysanthia. The intimidating, terrifying Lord of the Abyss looked at her with an expression so intensely raw it stole the breath from her lungs. Slowly, deliberately, right in front of the 1,000 kneeling soldiers of the Dawn Pack, Razian, the unstoppable monster who had just shattered a kingdom, dropped to one knee before her. Chapter 10. The wind howled through the frozen tree line, but the vast courtyard of the Dawn Pack was dead silent. Razian stopped walking. Right at the edge of the snowy path, in full view of the 1,000 kneeling soldiers who had once mocked her, the terrifying Lord of the Abyss turned to face Lysanthia. He didn't speak. He simply let go of her hand and stepped back. Then, The apex predator, the beast who had just shattered a kingdom and brought an entire army to the ground without lifting a single weapon, bowed his head. His knee hit the snow. A collective, terrified gasp rippled through the golden ranks of the Dawn Pack. They had never seen an alpha kneel. To them, submission was a display of ultimate weakness, but Lysanthia knew better. It was the ultimate display of absolute power. He didn't care about their archaic rules or their judging eyes. He only cared about the woman standing in front of him. "Razian," Lysanthia whispered, her breath visible in the freezing air. "What are you doing? Stand up." He didn't move. He looked up at her. His golden eyes were completely clear of the chaotic, dark storm that had haunted him for a century. There was only steady, ancient warmth. "I have spent my entire life being hunted," Razian said. His voice was a deep, resonant rumble that carried effortlessly over the silent crowd. "I was told I was a mistake, a monster that needed to be locked in the dark." He reached up and unclasped the heavy, obsidian black fur mantle from his broad shoulders. The cloak of the dragon wolf. The ultimate symbol of his absolute rule over the abyss. He didn't hand it to her. He reached up and wrapped it securely around her shoulders. The heavy weight of the fur settled over her, instantly chasing away the winter cold. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a coronation. He was publicly crowning her right on the ashes of her past. "You didn't look at me and see a beast," he continued, his massive hands resting gently on her waist. "You looked at me and saw a man." Lysanthia's throat tightened. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was no longer the broken spare. She was standing tall, cloaked in his absolute protection, looking down at the very people who had once cheered for her destruction. "You gave me your mind when mine was shattering," Razian whispered, his voice dropping so low that only she could hear the raw vulnerability beneath the alpha tone. "You stepped into the blade so I wouldn't have to surrender. You fought for me when the entire world wanted me dead. Because you were worth it," she answered. Her voice was fierce, unwavering, and loud enough for every soldier to hear. "You were always worth it." Razian's jaw tightened. He slowly reached up, his rough fingers tracing the glowing silver crescent moon on her collarbone. The true mark. His permanent, unbreakable claim. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. His breath was a warm ghost against her skin, smelling of ash, winter air, and pure devotion. "They called me the curse of the world," he murmured, his words burning themselves into her soul. "But you were never my cure, Lysanthia. You are the only reason I choose to stay human." The words hit her straight in the heart. It wasn't a confession of dependence. It was a vow of absolute, terrifying love. She reached down, her hands softly cupping his face. "Always." Razian finally stood. He towered over her, over the kneeling army, over the shattered remnants of Cyrus's pathetic legacy. But his hand immediately found hers, intertwining their fingers in an iron grip. He didn't look back at the ruined palace. He didn't spare a single glance for the defeated king bleeding in the dust. They turned their backs on the Dawn Pack forever. Lysanthia pulled the heavy black mantle tighter around her shoulders. She didn't walk behind him. She walked exactly beside him, her head held high, their strides perfectly matched. The outcast and the monster, they walked into the blinding winter sun, leaving an era of lies and ashes entirely behind them. And as their silhouettes disappeared into the tree line, the world finally understood the terrifying truth. The dragon wolf hadn't just found his mate, he had crowned his queen.